Welcome to Healing Beyond the Trauma. My name is Megan Alves. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And this podcast, I want to break the stigma around mental health and have real, unfiltered conversations about healing. Some stories are going to be raw, even triggering at times, but they're real and they're honest because healing starts with honesty. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, stuck, or like you're carrying it all, you're not. Here, you're going to gain validation, practical tools, and a new perspective to move forward. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your future. So let's dive in. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Trauma. My name is Megan Alves, and I am really excited for this conversation today for so many reasons. But just to give the listeners an idea, I am in the parenting stage of raising teenagers. And so I stepped back in my clinical practice from having teenagers on my caseload because I thought it was so important during this season. I mean, it's a wild freaking ride of a season that I'm going to let other experts kind of like take those reins for teens while I just kind of like manage my household. And so today I'm talking to an expert in the field of parenting and teens and family dynamics. Let me welcome you, Braxton Storm with Calm the Storm LLC. And he is another licensed clinical social worker here in Nevada and actually licensed in Utah too. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and chat with us. Introduce yourself. How did you get started in this field? And what's your passion around the family dynamics roles?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Megan. I think this is a really cool opportunity. The way that I kind of got into this is probably similar to most therapists. We all have stories, but I grew up in a very unstable environment. I grew up in California, and I was in foster care several times. I lived with my grandma for a while, and then eventually was adopted by my aunt and uncle when I was 10. And I never really, it's so funny, I should say this, but in my court documents, when I came of age, I was able to get all my court documents, and there's a literal quote in there that says, "I hate social workers." And I thought that was
That
so
is
funny.
so funny.
Yeah, that was after I had already been in my undergrad. I was in the social work program, and I got that, and my wife was like, "Oh my gosh." It was
That is
just,
something that like bonds us even more. I do a lot of referrals for those listening to
yeah,
Braxton in this season. But I'll tell you, and shout out to Natasha Mosby at UNLV because she reeled me into social work.
yeah,
And I was trying to get integrated healthcare out in Nye County
okay.
and just having horrible experiences with social workers coming out. And she was like, Megan, everything that you're doing is social work. Why aren't you a social worker? I was like, can I be real with you or should I sugarcoat it? And she's like, no, fucking lay it out. And I was like, okay. And I go, I don't like social workers. I don't understand
Yeah,
how many social workers have come out to Nye County and they're like, I don't do this level of trauma. Like, what are y'all doing? And
r-
so I love that about like 10-year-old Braxton was like, no, I'm good. I'm going to run from this field. I don't even
yeah,
like social work.
not
Both of
doing it.
us were like, no.
Yeah, yeah, it's super funny. But I mean, I think it's just so cool. I really, in specific, really like social work because it's so diversified. There's so many things you could do. I mean, I
Yes.
I started off in foster care parent recruitment, and then I transitioned into nonprofit work. I worked with domestic violence for a while, and then
Mm.
had a mentor there, Loretta Clem. I'm not sure if you know who she is, but
Shout out to Loretta, yeah.
yeah, she was my mentor and got me into therapy, and yeah, here we are. I mean, it's been a wild journey.
And now we love the field. I'm like,
Yeah,
I love this work, and I know you do too. I mean, you're getting super out there on your social media, just answering some questions and giving some tips for parenting, which is always needed. But I think I always kind of joke in these parenting seasons because I remember my dad telling me, maybe a decade ago, that he wouldn't want to be in our shoes as parents in 2025 because he would often say, kids don't come with manuals. Like my kids didn't come with manuals, so I didn't really know what to do. And he's like, Megan, you have like 500 manuals that you're listening to. It just seems like so much. And it's
mhm.
so true, isn't it?
There's a lot of content. I mean, you and I were talking about this before, right? Like, there's so much
Yeah.
information. It's really hard, especially as new parents, to figure out like how do I want to parent? There's so many options. And what I've found through my experience as a parent and a therapist is there's a lot of options, but there's a few good ones, right? That really do the research backs it. Kids and the results in the relationships really do back it too. And so I just want to push that out there as much as I can.
Yeah, so let's answer some questions that came across about parenting and what you just mentioned as connection. I
Yeah.
think oftentimes, especially in 2025, we are freaking busy. It seems busier than ever. We're pulled in a lot of directions. Like I said, I'm in parenting of teen stage, so I didn't even have no, they canceled a practice, so I only had 1 day off of taking my kids to and from practice in 7 days, and there's not an end in sight just yet for next week either. So let's talk and let's think about the different developmental stages so that those of you listening, if you're in your early stage of parenting to teen parenting, about and think about those developmental stages. When we talk about connection, what are some, and we're going to condense it, right? What are some of the most important things for us to think about in forming these connections on these stage groups?
Yeah, this is really important, right? So I have little kids. My oldest is 6, and so well, I guess 5, almost 6. And at that stage, right, like 0 to 3, 0 to 5, it's really about play, right? Like really getting to understand our kids, letting them learn how to express themselves in a safe way, setting up boundaries for kids. All of those things, especially when it comes from a parent who is emotionally available for their child, right? With all the tantrums, all the different things,
Yeah.
right? The not eating and all the crazy stuff that happens. It's really important for us as parents to show up, right? And be calm. My
Mm.
wife always says like we just have to last 1 minute longer than their tantrum, right? If we can do that, we're in good shape.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at that stage, that's what connection is about, right? Setting up the framework for the rest of the relationship. And kids learn I don't know if this is completely true, but the last, I learned this years ago. Kids learn everything that they need to know about relationships from 0 to 3. So if we can set up a good
Mm.
dynamic for them, then the rest of their, hypothetically, the rest of their life, if done in a healthy way, seems to be on a good trajectory. Now, moving into like, preteen, teenager years, right? It's really about autonomy and teaching kids about how to make decisions, right? And how to value themselves, how to have self-esteem. And one of the most important things that I've seen is that as a parent, if we can do the healing ourselves, right? And model that,
Mm.
oh my gosh, right? It's so powerful. And gosh, I mean, I could talk about this forever, but whenever parents come in
Yeah.
or whenever, teens want to come into my office, I always tell the parents, like, I'll see you guys on the first session because I want to get to know these parents and see where they're at
Yeah.
emotionally. And it's on purpose, right?
Right.
Parents who are emotionally
Yeah.
immature.
Very intentional. It's
Yeah,
important. Yeah.
right. Parents often,
Yeah.
it's hard to reflect on ourselves and understand ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that you hit so many important points that I want to make sure that we don't brush over.
Sure.
In these early developmental stages, this infancy to toddlerhood, you mentioned that connection. And we have seen some of the research coming out that, the brain and those neural pathways that tend to develop in those connections, they can continue to grow when we create stable, safe environments for
Right.
kids. And so, as you talk about that connection piece, you mentioned lasting a little bit longer in the tantrum. And then you mentioned, that emotion regulation as the parent. And oftentimes, I would hear that the parents would say, I've never even heard about these tools. I've never even known how to label my emotions. I'm not even sure. Like I often use the 0 to 10 scale, like the
Mhm.
temperature scale, for parents and adults. Like, do you know what your 0, calm, cool, and collected versus 10 is and what it looks like to climb up that scale and when you need to implement, because everybody's 0 to 10 is totally different, and
Yeah.
my 0 to 10 is totally different, and I'm already stressed, but I
Yeah.
didn't really understand that until I put ample time of practice into it. And I will hear that over and over again for parents. And so when you think about that emotion regulation and as a family, as a therapist who sees families, what are some of those things and tips and tools or maybe homework that you provide the parents to start checking in with themselves and being able to be that model when they don't know what they don't know?
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the best books that I've ever read as it relates to parenting is The Whole Brain Child by Dr. Dan Siegel. I actually have a parenting group based on that material. It has a workbook associated with it for parents that have this question, like what do I do in these circumstances? In that book, it provides 12 different strategies, and they're all directed, at least in the book, they're directed towards your child, like how to teach your child about emotion regulation and understanding what's going on. But in the workbook, it directs it towards the parent. And so I just love teaching parents about why they do the things they do. One of the first things that we want to
Mm,
understand is emotion recognition, right? Like you said,
yeah.
most people don't even know what they're feeling, right? I was just
Yeah.
on the phone and they were talking about thoughts that they were having and things, and they were saying like, I feel like the da 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 da, and it wasn't any. There was no emotion. There was no emotion there. There was just a thought. And so redirecting parents
Yeah.
to understanding their emotions is really key. And then two, apart
Yeah.
from that, is like how do we like react given the emotions that we're feeling? Right. So what do we do with those emotions typically? And obviously it varies person to person. But like you said, the 0 to 10 scale, like most people tend to react in a big way, right? When they feel big emotions, or they shut down completely. Neither of them tend to be
Yeah.
very healthy. So that leads into just the other strategy that I use, which is name it to tame it. So if we can share with ourselves, our spouse, our teen, I'm feeling, felt, I feel this emotion, and this is why, then it tends to externalize that emotion. It becomes like something tangible that we can hold on to, we can let go of, we can do something with. So those are the two big things that I tend to uh, use with parents.
And you mentioned something important, like, this has to be a practice,
Yeah.
because if this isn't something that a parent has done often from even their if they haven't had somebody around them that has modeled, then emotion regulation or emotion identification, they don't know. So, the beautiful part about this that I want the listeners to hear is that it takes practice, but it's so doable. I mean, I've seen it with hundreds of clients, and it's the most beautiful thing when they come into a therapy room and they first check in and how are you feeling today? I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, let's explore that. Like, of course we all say that we're fine. I'm good. Like, that's not an emotion. And so I bring out the emotion wheel. Like, let's name some of those emotions. And it's almost sticker shock at times,
Yeah.
realizing just how many emotions we have. And so when they start to recognize that emotion, and like you said, eh, practicing it with a partner, I feel this, or looking in the mirror, right? Like, if you don't have somebody that's good on that receptacle in before you go with your child, look in the mirror. That's a hard one sometimes.
It's
That,
rough.
like, mirror practice and actually, like, being upset and saying, I'm feeling really angry.
Yeah. There's a big
Oh,
difference though between just saying it in our minds or just recognizing it and being able to express it. Sometimes I'll just have parents journal, right? Like writing it out and
yeah.
having our minds see it on paper, right? And then repeating it. Obviously, if you can say it to someone else, the cool thing about the parent child relationship is that when you do things, your child is picking up on it, right? So when you're saying emotion, right? And we're going to talk about all these things, but when you say stuff, your child is learning these things. So I feel
Yeah.
blank because blank. Oh my gosh, like one of the most powerful sentences in the world, right? And in any
Right.
relationship. So if we can teach our child, not even, it's kind of inadvertently, right? Just saying, oh, you're in the kitchen, you stub your toe. Oh, I feel so mad, right? That hurt so bad,
Right.
right? Oh my gosh, super
Right.
cool, right?
Super cool. And so you mentioned what's considered in the therapy world, for those listening, like an I feel statement. And what that is I feel blank. You've got to identify that emotion. So you're going to have to think about it, especially if we've never thought about all these emotions. And then you've got to think about what just triggered that emotion,
Yeah.
right? Like that other blank is like, what happened? What triggered that emotion? I stubbed my toe and that hurt and I'm angry. Like, like
Yeah.
pissed off, right? If I can name those emotions, I'm going to go get some ice. That slowly starts to translate into the practice of being able to understand what your emotions are doing. So, for example, and I believe I grabbed this from The Whole Brain Child when my kids were younger. It's such a great book. I often told them about, the hand brain model,
Yeah.
which, is such a beautiful term. And so one of the things that I remember practicing for myself before I really had a good grasp of regulating feeling overwhelmed by toddlerhood is I would tell them I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm going to go take a break so that I can calm down. Or if I was too heightened and I couldn't think of all of those things, I would say I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm going to go put myself in timeout to calm down. And I started hearing my kids say that in toddlerhood. Like, I'm going to go in timeout for a minute.
Super cool.
Like,
Yeah.
that's their way of regulating their emotions. And I thought to myself, like, that's such a great gift. And they learned how to do that even I would get calls. My son would kill me, so I won't go into details. But like, I remember getting calls like when my kids were in elementary school, and they were telling me your kid goes to the bathroom a few times a day and is in there. Like, you should probably bring him to a doctor. And I'm like, nope, that's his zen. Like
That's
when
the
he gets
same.
overstimulated, it's
Yeah.
a zen. And like, thank goodness I watched that through his toddlerhood and paid attention to know, like, oh no. And he grew out of it because he found other ways to regulate the overstimulation of school.
Right.
And that's another thing about like that behavior wasn't bad. It didn't make him a bad kid.
Right.
It made him an overwhelmed kid that needed a bigger tool as he started getting older and in social situations. And how do you handle when generations, and we're talking so many generations, that children were seen and not heard and they were to be there. And now we're moving into this, like, we want you to express your emotions so that you're a better human in society and doing bigger things in even better ways. And so, how do you manage those generational strongholds that tend to show up in parents? And you mentioned why we parent the way that we do. How do you start getting in tune with that?
Well, the thing that I've noticed is that even if, like the previous generations who have children who come to see me, although it's kind of stereotypical to say, like we don't talk about emotions or I never did that or whatever, right? Like it was very appearance based. And if I look good, then I must feel good. What I found is that those parents that come into my office,
Mhm.
they don't really feel good, right? I have had so many parents who come from previous generations come here and just break down because they have no idea why they turned out the way they did, why they're doing or feeling the way that they are. And so I think that vulnerability piece, which is something we'll talk about, like just getting parents to be vulnerable with themselves and really recognize that the way that they were raised or the way that they're raising their children or the way that they're dealing with their own stuff doesn't feel good, right? As much as we want to say it does, or we don't want to acknowledge it, or we want to shut it down or whatever, it doesn't feel good. And once parents recognize that, I think that's the gateway that I've seen in getting parents and children to open up and start to deal with it in a healthier way. I would say that that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with you there that that vulnerability piece. I love when parents, show up in the clinical setting and they say, "I'm just so tired of like getting so angry so quick." That is
Yeah.
such a beautiful nugget of knowledge that any parent can come in and say. And there is no blame, shame, judgment on that because our generations before us were doing the best with the tools that they had and you were doing the best that with the tools that you had. You didn't know what you don't know. I will say that so many times. And so
Right.
now it's let's do better with things that we can learn. And if that's not if that doesn't feel good, right? Like you explode on the kid because you've been overstimulated and you leave like, "Oh, that was such a rupture in our relationship and I
Yeah.
don't like how that feels," which those types of ruptures as we know really create as we talked about connection, it's going to create disconnect. Though that tension happening over and over and over again. But the beautiful thing about ruptures, if we learn how to repair them to the
Yes.
best of our abilities, it's beautiful.
So amazing.
And so when it comes to those ruptures, like let's talk about ruptures. We have ruptures. You mentioned that like toddler stage. If we can last a minute longer than their tantrum, then we're doing a great job because if their tantrum calms down, we're not going to do anything in the middle of a tantrum, right?
There's nothing
Like
there.
there's no
Remain
reasoning
calm.
happening.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Build
Yeah.
connection. Being calm, I think, is
Keep
one of
the
the
kids
best things that
safe.
you can do. Yeah. Keep the kids safe, right? We have 3 rules in our house, and I teach them to my clients. You can feel whatever emotion you want to the biggest extent that you want to feel it, but you can't hurt people, you can't hurt others, you can't hurt yourself, and you can't destroy property, right? As long as those things are in check, we're good,
Yeah.
right? We're cool. And if they're not, that doesn't mean that you get whipped by the
Yeah.
belt, right? I just hold you, I keep you safe, and we kind of ride the wave of emotion. But here's the thing, kind of to your point, like, yes, it'd be awesome if every time we waited, 1 minute longer than the tantrum, but sometimes we don't, right? Sometimes we're gonna lose it. Sometimes, like
Yeah.
we talked about before, we have a
Yeah.
day, right? And then we get
Done it.
home and yeah, I do it all the time. And we get home and we snap or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's okay, right? It's okay to have grace with ourselves and be like, I'm human, right? And then again, this is the hard part for a lot of people is that it's okay to be vulnerable and go to your child
Mm.
and say, "You know what? I really didn't show up in the way that I wanted to. That wasn't fair to you. What did you feel when I did that? And here's what I'm going to do different." Right? It's much
Yeah.
more in depth than just like, "Hey, I'm sorry for that." Right? But when you teach
Yeah.
children that even an adult, even my parent makes mistakes and can come to a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 16-year-old and say, "I acknowledge that that was not cool and this is what I'm going to do
Mhm.
different." Again, like you're teaching their brain, creating these neural pathways so that when they hit
Yeah.
issues, they can show up in the same way.
Yeah. And I think that that's hard for it was hard for myself. It's hard for a lot of parents that I see to be able to say that the way that they responded, and I want to kind of like really lay this out because it's the way that they responded to what was happening that they did not like. But oftentimes the hard understanding with this teeter totter is, but I reacted this way because my child did this.
Yeah, that's a
And
whole
so
nother thing.
they
Yeah.
pushed me to react this way,
Yeah.
and they should know better.
Yeah.
What do we do in those type of situation and that, like that tug of war is happening?
Well, let's just be clear on one thing. I that's a great point. I should have said this, but there is no one or nothing that makes you react the way you do besides yourself, right? So there's no yelling, there's no back talk, there's no avoidance, there's no missing homework that makes you yell, right? That's it. That's all on you, right? There's something within
Yeah.
you based on this experience that's all too familiar that creates this emotion, and thus you've responded like this previously and now we're responding like it again. But there's nothing in your child's life that's going to make you do something. That's you got to
That
own that.
that
And it's
should
uncomfortable.
make you, right?
Right. Right.
And that's the important part. And so what you're saying is that as the parent, I've got to work and practice on the ability that when my child triggers me, I have control over my response. My child doesn't get to have the control over how I respond because of what they
Right.
did.
Right. Yeah, we can't when I hear parents say, "Well, she made me yell," or "She made me do this." Okay. All right. Let's circle back, right? Like that's all within us. She might have triggered you. Something she said might have
Yeah.
triggered you, but you got to own that
Yeah,
response,
when
right?
I ask 3 different times for you to clean up, I
Right.
get triggered, and I get
That's
mad,
hard.
and then I yell, and I like it.
Right.
Yeah,
But that's where that vulnerability comes in, right? We can acknowledge that it's hard when people don't listen to us, right? We can say, Susie, you know
yeah,
what? Like that was not your fault. But when you respond to me like that, right, it reminds me of times when people didn't listen, right? And that's really hard for me. And
mm,
I want to do better. So how about could you help me with this? Or can we be a team? Right? It's probably hard
mhm,
for mom or dad to jump on you. And I understand that. I don't want to do that. But I also need you to listen to me. So moving forward, let's create
mhm,
a game plan, right? That vulnerability piece, acknowledging our
yeah,
stuff really leads to a lot of hope.
and that's that rupture and repair happening right there. The rupture is, you know, I asked Susie 3 times to clean up. She didn't listen. Now I'm triggered. I scream and yell. We get into a screaming and yelling match,
Yeah.
and everybody storms off. And then I sit back, and I don't like the way that I responded to that situation. I don't like the fact that my kid's not listening to me. How do we repair after that? And that's the part that you're saying, is that being able to be the adult in the situation and say, "Yeah, I don't like that that triggered me, and that was the response that I had in that situation, not because of what you did," right? Like, I know that that's what it was, but you shouldn't have that much control over me to have me respond that way. And let's make a plan together. What does this plan look like? If I ask for the first time, and I'll even say, like, and I get a lot of kind of, like, I guess, feedback from this, but we have a lot of contracts in our home because it helps us to go back and game plan what the next time looks like. If you don't like yelling in the house, I don't like yelling in the house. What do we need to do as a team so that we're not going back and forth and recreating these yelling fits? Okay, what happened the first time I asked you? I really wasn't listening. I was just playing, my video game, or I was talking with a friend, so I just didn't
Right.
respond. How would it feel if you asked me for something and I just didn't respond to you? Oh, well, that would suck. Yeah, bro,
And
it would suck. So what
it
do we
does.
do so that
Mhm.
if you need a minute and then you can go and finish what I've said, then what does that look like? Oh, I should have probably said, "Can I have 2 minutes, close this out, and then I'll go do that task." Cool. That's
Yeah.
totally fine with me. I'm sure we'll hear some slack here because, listen the first time and do it the first time. Totally understand. But if I know, and especially we have to think here too, this all depends on your kid. And that's the thing, why 5,000 pieces of information of how to parent a kid, I will tell you, will work one way for one of my kids and work a completely different way for another one of my kids.
Right.
And so being able to have the connection and the ability to trust yourself. And as you mentioned, vulnerability, how do parents, I mean, the parent guilt is wild, right? Moms have it, dads have it. How
Yeah.
do parents start to trust themselves in the decision and the rules that they're creating in the home
Yeah.
with
That's a good
all of this stuff?
That's a good question. One of the first things that comes to mind is that children are so resilient, right? And there's no child that's going to leave childhood unscathed, right? There's always going to be issues or things to talk about into adulthood. So if we're looking for perfection, it's not going to happen, right? As parents, we are going to make
Mm,
mistakes, and a lot of them, and our children are going to be impacted by those mistakes. However, if we embed within those mistakes skill sets, right? Sometimes,
yeah.
I mean, I have lots of opinions about timeouts and all these other things, but if we're embedding skills while we make mistakes, I think we're in pretty good shape, right? If we're teaching our children through modeling or through communication how to deal with issues, that's the rest of their life, right? They're going to get into relationships or jobs or school, and they're really going to experience the same thing. Now, if we can teach them how to deal with it, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that point. Out of a lot of the things that we've talked about so far,
sure.
you mentioned a lot about parents being triggered. How would we know we have a trigger within ourselves? And how do we start to, as parents, understand ourselves more?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, a lot of times parents who come into my office, they don't feel satisfied with the way that they're engaging in life, especially with their children. That's probably a good sign that you have some triggers. Now, there's probably some common things, uh, but one of the first steps is to understand, like in the relationship with our child, what needs aren't being met, right? Because that's usually when we get
Mm,
reactions. So, like, if our child isn't listening to us, what's the need that isn't being met, right? And it's usually tied to something we've experienced. Like, man, I just feel like my voice is never heard. Well, as a child, you probably felt like your voice was never heard. And now you have one and they're ignoring you. And so it ties back to whatever you've been through. And that causes a reaction, right? Because you feel stuck or you feel very similar to how you did. And that's scary for us. So understanding our needs, I think, is a great start for that. No, there's other stuff,
mhm.
right? Like for me, it's when things get really loud. I don't like really loud yelling, screaming, chaos, which having a house full of little kids is that's what it is, right? And so I've had to
Yeah.
learn, like, the sound that I'm hearing is not the sound that's causing me to get emotional, right, and get heightened. That sound is tied to trauma, right, and tied to a really
Mhm.
rough childhood. And this loudness is fun, right? And so there's different meanings of what's going on, and I have to train my brain consistently. Every time I come home, my kids all come up like screaming and yelling, "Oh my gosh!" Right? And that's not bad, right? But my
Yeah.
brain sometimes tells me this is too much. You're not safe. This isn't okay. And I have to remind myself consistently that it's a different. I'm living a different experience than what my brain is remembering in those moments.
I think that's such an important thing for all of us to remember that triggers can even be in those happy moments. I often talk to a lot of parents that, like, well, Megan, I didn't have these big traumas. And we often think about traumas as the military and the first responders only.
Right.
And yes, there's trauma there, but we have many of us have lower T traumas, lowercase t traumas
Sure.
that have happened in our lives that make it so that I mention this book quite often, but Body Keeps the Score
Yeah.
is such an amazing reminder that oftentimes we're just going through our day to day as children and adolescents and young adults, and things are happening around us that happen to us that help us create felt safety. So
Yes.
you just mentioned, like, wait a minute, I'm safe here. Like, this reaction is coming from a place when I didn't feel safe. And it was even trying to rob you of these good moments when your kids were yelling in excitement or whatever it may be, how your reaction in that situation. And so when you think about, and I know you hold groups and you do individualized therapy, when
Yeah.
you think about the parents that have had their plate full, where would they start to work on these things? What would be some good warning signs, and what would be some good ways to start to work on these things?
So if you find yourself as a parent constantly overreacting, given the size of the experience, so let's say that your child, you know, doesn't listen to you and you're screaming and yelling, or you're, hitting walls or doing things like this, or anything that feels uncomfortable, right? Then that's probably a warning sign. I would say that that's the basic
And it can
warning sign.
also be on the flip side of that, right? Like, it
Yeah.
would be the overreacting, but
Or
then
under.
on the flip side of that too is the underreacting.
Yeah.
And so, like, actually not
There's a
having quite
spectrum
that
for sure.
baseline. Mhm.
Yeah. Kind of passive parenting, right? If we're not engaged at all because it's too overwhelming, right? So our kids are kind of just running the show. They control the climate of the house because we're so scared to interact. That's another good sign, right? That something is off within
Yeah.
us. And so that's kind of the warning signs. Now, one of the first steps I would suggest going to therapy, right? Let's sign up and
I know we're
figure
an
out what.
advocate for therapy for sure.
Yeah, yeah, let's figure out what's going on, right? Because if you think about it, like if you've always been in a blue room and you're in a blue room and you don't know that there's other colors, you're never going to figure out there's other colors. You have to leave the room or have someone come in and show you other colors. And that's how I see therapy. Is
Mhm.
like if your mind has created a reality, that's the only reality you know until someone outside of your mind suggests that maybe there's a different one. And so therapy can be a safe and
Yeah.
comfortable place to do that.
Yeah. And I think I hear parents oftentimes, with the strongholds of schedules. I mean, we talked about that a second ago. Like, it's not
Yeah,
easy for parents to break away and actually make time an hour a week for therapy. And so, a few things that, to keep in mind is that journaling is a great place to start so that you
sure.
can start to identify some of those. And then, Braxton, oftentimes when we talk about therapy, and especially on this podcast, sometimes it's not easy to find a therapist. So
No.
if you're a parent looking for a therapist that you want to start working on your stuff to be a better parent, you want a better parent-child relationship too, like, what advice would you give for parents to find a good fit?
One of my clients years ago was like, it's kind of like window shopping, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
therapists offer 15-minute consultations. So maybe you can come up with a list of like your core needs in a therapist, right? Some therapists or some people need therapists who are more gentle, some need more like direct, no sugarcoating. And there's a lot of variety out there, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
we have
Yep.
statistically like 3,000 therapists here in Vegas. So there's a lot of therapists. And it's okay. There's no shame in meeting with someone saying, this isn't really what I'm wanting. Therapists definitely
Yep.
aren't usually offended by this. At least we shouldn't
No.
be. It's pretty
No.
common to not be a good fit.
Mhm.
And you'd rather have that from both sides, right? A therapist wants to connect with their clients, and I think clients
Mhm.
completely deserve to connect with theirs. That's
Yeah.
my thought on that.
We're, like, actually making sure that we're a good fit for you as much as a client comes in and we wanna be a good fit for you. If we don't vibe, right? Like, that's
Yeah,
okay. And
it's
there's
all
other
good.
I mean, I'm definitely a therapist. I'm definitely one of those therapists. If we don't vibe, and I will always say, if there's ever time, just let me know and let me support
Yeah,
helping get some resources. I don't want this to close your book on therapy for whatever reason,
right.
because anyone who knows that they want to work on some stuff, I get super excited for anyone wanting to work on their own things. And that goes along with what you said. You came into this field because of your upbringing and you were then ready to, help others. This might be a vulnerable question for you, but I
Sure.
think it's important that those listening understand, what did you do to make sure that you can actually show up for your clients when you've already had a history?
Yeah. So clients have asked me this before, and here's the thing: I go to therapy every week too. Right? I have a therapist that I go
Mhm.
to and I talk to, and it's sometimes about work stuff, sometimes about parenting things or my past. I'm a huge believer in therapy, number one, and two, practicing what you preach. So as much as I
Mhm.
can, I just had a client the other day who came in and she has a child who's really kind of hard for her. And I was offering some suggestions, and she was like, it's so easy for you to say it, but I wonder if it'd be
Mm.
as easy for you to live it like you're telling me to live. And I was like, goodness, like let me tell you about it, right? Like it's rough. And I acknowledge like the things that I say are not always lived by the person saying it. But one thing I can for sure tell you is
Right.
that I am consistently working on it. And that's the only way to get anywhere, right? So that's the kind of the bond that I try to create with my clients is like I'm just a human who's learned some skills that I find valuable for
Yep.
other people, and I'm just trying to share the message, right? Like this is all stuff that I'm working
Yeah.
on too. So it's rough. It's
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like all of us are super imperfect. The shame and the guilt and the mess ups and the all the other stuff. I do that all the time, right? Like I live that world, and I also know that there's other ways to do it. And so most of the time I try to practice those things too. And I think that's a key part. And what I found is that I think that just creates a level of relatability and vulnerability between me and the people I work
Yeah.
with. It's like I'm just another human sitting in the chair trying to empathize with you and maybe teach you some skills that can help you as they've helped me.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that therapists are just humans, right?
Yeah.
We just decided to go down a path to educate ourselves. And my hope is that all therapists have taken the time to do their deep, heavy, dirty work and not bring it in, so that
Right.
when a therapist is sharing something, it's very surface. You don't need to know my life or what I'm going through by any means,
Right.
but when a therapist has done their work, that means that we not only have learned the education around these tools, we practice these tools so that we can show up not only bigger in our family, but also bigger in our clinical room. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, we're all human. And
Well,
this is definitely not a space. I mean, this is the reason that this podcast is here, is like, I want to break the stigmas of mental health. Please do not hold me on any other pedestal than just right beside you, just walking right along with you in this path,
well,
because I'm human. I make mistakes, but I do know the tools to get back on that change field and whatever it may be. And we are doing the best that we can do, just as we view when a client comes in. And I can't speak for every therapist, but I have Braxton here because I know that these values are pretty in alignment, that when a client comes in our office, there is no judgment. When I'm talking to somebody on the football field, there's no judgment. I don't know about you, but I am not, my clinical brain is not on 24/7. I've
No.
learned very well how to shut that off if another parent is talking
Right.
to me on a football field or something. But there isn't judgment because, again, the broken record in me is saying we don't know what we don't know, but we can't do better if we don't know better. So
Right.
taking those steps when it comes to building connection with our kids is really important. If you want the healthiest connection, right? There's healthy connection and there's unhealthy connection, and there's a ton of stuff in between when it
Sure.
comes to building connection from parent and child. I know I want to wrap this up soon, but I have one more question for you that I think as we go in and move the age group a little bit to parenting of teens, parenting of older adolescents, how do we've talked about rupture and repair, but and that rupture is so big that the connection gap is huge, and if any. And so, you're waiting till that last minute. It feels like the connection cannot be rebuilt between the parent and the child. What are some of the things that we can maybe encourage those in that season if that relationship does have a bit of that gap? What are some of the things that you can give there for encouragement and, I guess, guidance?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Dr. Becky Kennedy, who I'd highly recommend for anyone who has especially strong-willed children, but she shared an experience where she had a client who was much older, right? She was a parent of adult children, and she was really worried about this exact thing. And she was like, I think that the gap, the rupture is way too big. Like, there's nothing that I could ever do to make up for it. And she asked this parent a question. She said, if you had, in your situation, your parent who had really messed with you, right, and had really created the same sort of rupture, but they had done the work. They had shown up for themselves. They had listened to your needs, and maybe it took years, but they had done the work. And they came to you and said, "You know what, Susie? I am so sorry for what I've done, right? For the 30 years or however much stuff there is, right? And this is what I've done to change." Right? I've acknowledged the pain. I've showed up for myself. I've learned the skills, and I want to show up as the parent that you need. Wouldn't that have some sort of positive impact on you? Not that it would change the entirety of the relationship and make it what it once was, but would you not be more willing to maybe offer some forgiveness, or at least start to have a relationship with that person? It's never too
Mm.
late, right? It's absolutely never too late. But I think that shame sometimes gets in the way, and it makes us not want to change. But if we can just start right
Yeah.
now, right? If we can start today to show up in the ways that we want to, sometimes in the ways that our children want us to or need us to, over time, it really does make a difference. It just might not be on the timetable that we'd like.
Right. And I love that. And I think that that is such a beautiful reminder for so many of us that when we start to do that work, our kids will see it and they can come around. And it is, again, ultimately up to them. But
Yeah,
at the end of the day, it's really ultimately up to us to continue to do that work, to bridge those gaps, repair those ruptures. And, I'll always put an asterisk here that sometimes mental illness makes connection really hard.
yeah,
And so advocating on that on therapy is so huge, because if you struggle and you feel like you've tried all the things and you're going in that circle, but something's just not working, don't do it alone. There's no need to do it alone, because there are therapists and professionals out there that would love to help support you to get to a better place for you, your family relationships and dynamics, for your current and your future self. So I just want to end with that note. It was so good to talk about some of these topics, and we hope those of you listening really understand what can shift and give you a little bit of hope in these seasons that tend to shift. And I will make sure to link all of Braxton's contact information. I'll link the books that we talked about today. Braxton, is there anything that you want to leave us with, or any tools that maybe you just want to make sure the listeners get today?
I think the only thing is it's really important to start today, right? Like it's so crucial
Mm.
for us and our children to just take one step forward today. And it doesn't have to be big, but it's so worth it to do it. So that's all. That's it. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Megan, for having me on.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It was so good to see you. Thanks again. Have a great day.
You too. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you gained what you needed to hear today. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about the strength of moving forward. If today's episode resonated with you, take a moment to share it with someone you love, because when we share with love, we help to break the stigma together. If you want to connect with me and learn more about what we're doing over at Mental Summit to break these stigmas, please connect with me over at mymentalsummit.com. Keep showing up, keep growing, keep going together, and remember, you're not alone in this.